Wreck you! Die, scum! Curse you! Unlimited power! Hi, Zizaran here with another Build Guide collab, and this time we're revisiting Impending Doom with Crouching Tuna. This is an absolute banger of a build. Something I've played in the past myself. Do be warned though, it might not be the best solo self-on build, and while it might not look tanky, it is incredibly tanky, especially with endgame gear. But first, let's hear a little bit about some pros and cons of the build from Tuna.
Hello everybody, I'm Tuna. There are three upsides of the build. The first one is it's easily one of the best chaos damage over time builds in the game at the moment. And thanks to the Pathfinder proliferation, it is also one of the most comfortable clears. You know, you're going to be killing packs. Once a poison spreads to nearby monsters, basically you're going to see the whole screen melt, and it's really satisfying. The second upside is it has amazing recovery in the early game. Thanks to Master Surgeon, you're allowed to have permanent life flask uptime, meaning you'll roll your flasks in a certain way. It's going to basically sustain you all the way until you get to the late game variant of the build, where we roll our flasks for elemental damage reduction, and then we're going to be shifting all of the physical damage we take, and it's going to give us increased tankiness and basically make you immune to most damage in the game. And this feeds into the last upside. It's a great all-rounder and it has the potential to be a long project for the entire league, since it has a very high ceiling and a lot of sort of scalability into the endgame, with the potential to become immortal thanks to the new reintroduced amulet, the Eternal Damnation. So you will probably have seen some of these builds back in the Sanctum League. It's a very exciting build to sort of start with and progress along with, and I would say one of the best builds just currently in the game. However, for the three downsides, I do have to note that the build is quite complex. You must understand cast speed and cooldown recovery breakpoints, right? And these are things that are already automatically programmed into the path of building that I provided. However, if you do want to make changes to the build, be mindful that, you know, having too much cast speed might actually decrease your DPS. So if you want to input your character into PoB and sort of see how your DPS is affected by how much cast speed you have and how much cooldown recovery you have, make sure you do that, because it will tell you whether you have too little or too much, depending on whether your DPS goes up or down. Another downside is that in the early game, it does not have amazing single target damage. So it's not a good bosser when compared to some other builds, say like, you know, Detonate Dead or Maw of Mischief Elementalist. But with some more investment, you can take down all bosses in the game, including Uber bosses, but that is more of a late game goal, not something that you should strive to do in the very early game, week 1 I would say, or day 1, like some people do. The last downside is that it is reliant on the Vixen's entrapment to really become a build, and these uniques can be expensive on the first few days of the league. You know, for reference, last league on day 1 they were 40 chaos, but they quickly went down in price from there. And if you're an SSF, they are quite rare, so it is one of the builds that you probably reroll into, but you're not planning to start there.
If watching these videos helps you have a good league start, please consider subscribing to the channel, as it helps me and my team a lot. And Tuna, tell us a little bit, how does the build actually play?
Essentially, what you will do is you'll be casting Temporal Chains, which is going to be linked in your main 6 link here that you can see. With Impending Doom, I'll be casting Temporal Chains, and anytime I cast Temporal Chains, my Vixen's entrapment is also going to trigger. That is because every time I cast a Curse Hex skill, it will trigger socketed curse spells, when you do that. And it has a cool internal cooldown, which is also reduced by your cooldown recovery rate, which you can see here. If I take them off, you see that I'm casting 3 curses there, and that is because of the cascading effect of our Temporal Chains. And then we put Vixen's entrapment on, it's going to overlay the additional curses on there. And that is going to allow you to basically trigger the Impending Doom, since you are going over curse cap by 1. And since you then are removing 1 curse by applying the 3 other curses, it's going to instantly create that explosion. Next, what we will want to do is we'll have our Malevolence up on our Divine Blessing. We click that and we get a buff for the next 30 seconds. And then from there, we will be shield charging between packs and right clicking on top of monsters. And you'll see that the proliferation is basically going to take care of all the monsters which in the vicinity. And it's going to be killing all monsters on your screen. And that pretty much sums up the gameplay and how you will be playing this in maps. So yeah, shield charge around, right click on monsters, and watch the whole world melt, basically.
As always, we're using Path of Building. If you're not familiar with this, then make sure you check out the video on how path of building works. And Tuna's done a really, really good job of doing a step-by-step skill tree. We're going to have like the ascendancy points follow as well. So it's very easy for new players to follow. And for those of you that don't like video guides, he has made a written guide on Maxroll that you can check out. We'll link to that in the description down below as well. That is something you can look into. And here we have early game Impending Doom, which is using Cursed Ground because you're not going to get Vixens early. And that is a huge problem with the build. Obviously, Vixens can be really, really hard to get. So that's why we don't really recommend this for solo self-on. However, if you're playing and day 1, 2, 3, whatever, you find a Vixen's Embrace, that is a very core thing of the build and enough to swap to it. You can see here we're leveling with Poison Concoction, which obviously got nerfed a lot for late game, but early game is more than enough. Everything is really nicely broken into groups here, so it's easy to follow. And then there's an early game setup, a mid game setup, and an end game. Depends a little bit on your budget, obviously. If we go over to items, there are different gear sets of like what you want early game for example, Poison Concoction. And remember, this is based on your life flask, so you do want to roll a really nice one. Saturated is the best roll you can get, but these are the stats you want, right? You want the increased amount recovered and reduced recovery rate, especially for leveling, helps out a lot. There are a lot of uniques in the build. Not everything here is mandatory. Apeps isn't super rare. It's a bit of a hit and miss. Sometimes you find 5, sometimes you find 0. But they do end up being relatively cheap on Trade League. The number one thing that's going to be hard for this build is going to be Vixen's Entrapment. So you're going to be pouring all your currency early on into getting that because that is super build enabling. And while the build doesn't have a crazy amount of life, it really feels like a build that has like 20, 30k life. Because the way it works, once you get like Dawnbreaker, Lightning Coil, and a Taste of Hate being particularly expensive, you have so much physical damage taken as elemental, and you get a really, really nice mitigation from all of this. And that what makes the build surprisingly tanky is that we're using Enfeeble and Temporal Chains with so much curse effect, and you'll be surprised how little damage you're taking. So a lot of the early game things, so obviously you can just get a cast speed profane one with chaos damage or time multiplier and get the unveil chaos damage and skill effect duration. And other than that, most of the uniques here can be replaced by life and resist stuff, except for, of course, Vixens. That is a brutal one that you need early. But yeah, life and resist early. And a cool thing here, you really want to roll your flask well. You do have 2 choices. You can go for lots and lots of charge recovery, and this is really good for keeping 100% uptime on bosses. And you can also do the one that you gain charges, like 2 or 3 charges when you are hit. And a really cool combo with the charges when you are hit is this Flask Mastery. You recover 4% life when you use a flask, and then you use the enkindling or instilling orbs on your crafting bench. I can't remember which one, but you can do that when a charge or when a flask is full, it'll automatically pop. So while you're getting hit by things, your flasks are going to go like brrr, and you're going to be recovering 4% life per flask being used. You're basically immortal to fast hits, so it's incredibly strong. And on top of that, early game, we are using Master Surgeon, and this means that your life flask, you will have to keep pressing it, but it doesn't stop healing you when you're full. So it'll just, it's kind of like Slayer Overleech. It'll always like keep your life bar topped up, so it feels really, really good. And late game, you'll see that we swap away from Master Surgeon to Nature's Boon. You do still have the Fast Mastery there, which will keep your life topped up, and you still have like a lot of mitigation through that. But this Magic Utility Flask, you have 30% increased effect. It's just so strong at the late game, especially for things like Taste of Hate. And there's even like further, I remember Steel played this build at some point and did like insane tank with like a Corrupted Dawnbreaker and Eternal Damnation. It was borderline immortal, tanking every Uber on hardcore solo self. And obviously we're getting Balance of Terror back. Like this is a very popular build last league. We're getting Balance of Terror back this league, which is huge for cooldown recovery, which is very important for this build. You do need to try to balance cooldown recovery and cast speed on this build, but everything like this is also written a lot about in the Maxroll guide, so you can read more there. And Tuna has taken time to write loads of extra information here in the notes section, so a lot of things that you might run into that might be problems will be here. I hope you guys enjoy this build guide. A huge shout out to Crouching Tuna. If you aren't familiar with him, go make sure you check out his YouTube content, his Twitch content. He streams a lot, great creator, and does really good shit. And if you run into any problems with this build, he's played it a lot, and so have I. So either one of us will probably be able to help you, especially message Tuna. He's played it even more recently than me. So really good source of information. Make sure you check him out. Either way, I hope you guys enjoy this build. Sub to both our channels. More importantly, try to die less than I do.